So human rights is useful there, but in terms of political action, again, human rights has limitations because it's not connected to power in any serious way. So those are the just different iterations that I identify as related to democracy in goodness. In just one last thing, in the general interest in historicism, besides congratulating myself on my own education, which there's a little bit of that in here, is that historicism, I think, has been misunderstood because people often regard it as either doomed to generate relativism in ethics that means that, well, which then moves down the slippery slope to nihilism, and so we don't have any rational ethical standpoint to criticize the present, and that's one of the problems. That's how, or that history is bunk, that it's just the past, and we want to focus on the future, and that's a very American idea, and it's certainly a very capitalist idea, but it's also an American idea, and I actually am a little bit contrarian here in making a pitch for learning from the past. But again, not to take one's, not in order to be led by the past, but to be informed by the past. I mean, not in this case, it's Nietzschean as much as anything else. Nietzsche wrote an essay on history, about history for life, and here I think that's important. And then actually, if you think of one person, one of my teachers said to me that when I was in the early stages of sort of thinking historically, he said, well, then you too are going to be obsolete someday. Your own work. And I said, and the thing is, but at least people will have remembered what I've done if I do something worthwhile. And I think it's important to remember, things that people have done, because they've got the same number of chromosomes that we have. They've addressed, problems that aren't too unlike, as Tristan was saying. If you think about Trump, I mean, he's not. I mean, he really is one of a kind. But there are other kinds that are not too different from him. He's just the most idiotic example. Politician, perhaps world history. But so I'm making a plea that in some ways, if you look at, I've found that the history of political thought. I mean, there are some texts there that. They stand up pretty well. My son just sent me a link to a book about the rules for dictators or something like this. Anyways, and it was, there was a lot of contemporary information in it, but I said, well, why don't you read Machiavelli's The Prince? And he said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. A little bit more subtle and complex account of the motivations of rulers, and just there's a tendency to just focus on the new, which I don't think is altogether good, and I think that sometimes historical thinking can be a way of being more critical of the present and more useful for, in particular, democratic ethics than other ways of conceptualizing democratic ethics, which is not at all to say that theoretical schemes can be extremely useful. I mean, you want to build up your intellectual apparatus and how far you can think, and this is not to dismiss anything else that's written, unless that can be useful. But I just wanted to make a pitch for my approach, and so that's what I do. Okay. Thank you.
Burning question. I'll ask some questions.
Yes, please.
That's great. Okay, so guess I'll start with legitimacy. It seems today that there's a sort of, at least you talked about the three Weberian types, right? There's a bit of there's a breakdown, right, in bureaucratic rational authority. And sort of have this both a reaction against technocracy in Europe, right, and these arrival of these charismatic types. Is there a way that we can think about authority that's not? Because I think part of thinking about these virtue ethics is also thinking about authority. Why certain practices, cultural, social practices, are authorize our behaviors. Is there a way then that we can think about authority that's not top down? Or I mean,
well, I mean, I don't think.
Like in the way that, for instance, just
Yeah, sure.
to the question of to the issue of human rights, right? So you talk about Rorty, this guy would boast, I haven't read him, but Rorty famously in 1993 gives a lecture out of Oxford, which is about human rights. It's much more about feelings, and there's a great Glenn Hunt book, right, on the explosion of novels in the 18th century. But you also seem somewhat skeptical of the idea of human rights just as cultural practices that would foster, right, empathy across national lines and.
I mean, insofar as human rights is a vehicle for helping the workers of the world to unite, then that's fine. I tend to think that it's not. Human rights tends to be championed by very plush legal organizations run by lawyers, and they tend to focus on everything outside of NATO. But that said, I mean the texts of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the two basic covenants certainly do speak to the needs of people everywhere, I'd say, and that can be useful. I mean, the language of rights tends to be associated with Western intellectual history, but you don't, you can fudge that. I mean, but I tend to, actually I got interested in human rights when I finished my first book on Plato, because I thought, oh gee, Plato wrote about the polis, and now here we are 2000, and I can't just talk about political theory in relationship to the state, because the state is just one actor among many that are relevant to politics. And so I thought, well, here's, find out more about human rights. And then I found out that, that intellectual debates in human rights were not very interesting. There was a debate in anthropology about cultural relativism versus universality, and that sort of ended when it became clear that, first of all, no one who was a relativist wanted to say, no, we can't allow ideas to cross from outside to cross the border and into our society. We can only think of what we're doing and how we do it. So ethical ideas within societies were never immune to ideas from the outside. The question, and similarly, one found that universalistic ideas often had a hidden practical agenda which favored Western society. So, which isn't to say that some sort of transcending idea isn't valuable, and it couldn't be a way of connecting. But I do think that when it comes to political ideas, you have to connect the ideas to the practical opportunities that are available to people, and they tend to be shaped primarily by their own state, their own situation. And in terms of actual political change, I think you have to pay attention to the state as a source of, or the state, or the boundaries of the state as a primary source of collective power. And that if you're going to, sure, you want to look at, for example, I don't know, did anyone go to the talk on transnational civil disobedience? So maybe I heard that was a good talk, and really good talk, and I don't know how to I'm going to try and get his work, but I don't know what the referent is for that. Which isn't to say that, you know, I think that the people in the caravan could engage in a kind of act of civil disobedience. But I don't think that that can, and that's good. You know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's what they perhaps need to do. But I'm just saying that that's not a lever that can get you very far in terms of addressing the people who vote for the Republican Party. It's just not going to go there. You just have to address the questions of collective power, how, you know, what, you know, how we understand healthcare, how it gets funded, how we construct our educational system, and all these are, you know, how we address capital. I mean, that's where the money is, right? The money is not in the UN, it's not in these NGOs, it's not in academic discourse, it's in these other levers of power. You just have to pay attention to them if you're going to be interested in democracy.
Right, so dichotomy of humanitarianism, right, is thinking very much in the short term, right? Whereas,
Yeah. Right.
Human
Good
rights
point.
is
Oh.
maybe more aspirational, long-term project.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I mean,
Because dignity, right, which shows up a dozen times, right, in the UDHR, right, is definitely. I mean, I think that's sort of a placeholder concept, right?
Yeah, I actually wrote a review essay a couple of years ago called "Dignity: The Last Bastion of Liberalism," and this was because 4 books had come out within the same year about dignity. And dignity has to do with standing, and that's a good thing. But you know, what enables you to stand up, and then you have to talk about questions of power. And you just mentioning the word isn't going to get, for me, isn't going to get you.
Right.
Or you know, if you think about how dignity is expressed in public discourse, it's sort of in coffee table books, right, of suffering, you know, people in Africa or Asia or something like that, and how, you know, when you look at them, don't you see human dignity? And it's, you know, it's just not a very political project, it seems to me.
Right. No. One of the things that some of the thoughts of Zondag on photography serves this sort of political sentimentality.
Yeah. Yeah, and which isn't to say that you shouldn't give money to the organization. I mean, you know, if you've got enough money, I mean, help people wherever you can. But I just, it's just interesting that when it comes to the subjects of human rights and humanitarianism, both of which are valid causes and movements, they tend not to focus on, you know, the people who are excluded from voting in the United States, or conditions of Native Americans, or you know, lingering racism, and it's just all sorts of things that are just not issues. So that's the only thing that I'm concerned about. You know, the depoliticization of understanding ethics.
Right. Although one could, of course, frame all of those issues within
You could, but I just don't see the cogency of it as a discourse. I see it as a rhetorical. You know, if it's useful, that's fine. For example, it was used by the Mexican state, and I'm blanking on in Chiapas, right? The Mexican state used the discourse of human rights to dump on the attempt there to establish a more autonomous state based on more democratic principles. And it used human rights discourse to say that it was too particularistic, it was too, didn't observe the rights enshrined in the Mexican Constitution. So sometimes human rights can be co-opted. Where it's not co-opted, for example, and where it is used in a very interesting political way, is India. Because in India, human rights are embedded in the Indian Constitution, and Indian citizens can address the Supreme Court there, Supreme Courts, directly. The Supreme Courts in India have original jurisdiction. They don't have to go through 10 courts before they get their case heard by the Supreme Court. And so what happens? I mean, first of all, there's a huge backlog of cases in India. And most of the cases are decided in favor of the litigants. Yes, you don't have good housing. Yes, you don't have good health care. Yes, you don't have good education. And then what? Nothing happens. It's like in New York State, right? The Court of Appeals said, yes, we need to provide a quality education for all citizens. Did this change the way in which funding occurred for public education in New York State? No. So that's why that's one of the things. That's why I'm engaged in this sort of plea for politicizing our understanding of ethical questions. And one of the things that, if I may just, one of the things that's relevant here again in terms of discursive norms and political theory is that I'm arguing for this as a useful way of addressing society's problems, and as a primary useful way for addressing society's problems, invoking the notion of greater politicization, so that people understand better when their freedom and equality as democratic citizens are at stake, whether that's in a job, in the workplace, or education, or whatever. From Rawls's point of view, that would be a quote-unquote comprehensive conception of the good, which has to be understood as an individual choice. And that in a liberal society, you can be interested in that, or you can be interested in, promoting powerboat racing, or, or any range of things as your conception of the good. So for him, the choice of democratic politics is something that you should become involved in, is as far as he's concerned, a choice. And it's how, voting is a choice. You have the right to vote, but do you have to vote? Well, it only encourages them, or whatever people say. It doesn't concern me. And so that's the liberal view, right? The liberal view. John Stuart Mill, amazing writer, amazing intellect, said, well, all these workers are coming into the political arena. Let's make sure that they don't have too much power, so this one person, one vote thing is a little bit suspicious. So we have to have more. We have to have additional voting power to people who have advanced degrees from Oxford or something. Because he was worried about it. At the same time, he was much more of a Democrat, than most of his colleagues. And as you know, he was a major advocate for the equality of women. But he was worried about workers. And it's not, anyways. So, but the point I was making is that for liberals, political engagement is a choice. And if you do it, you're an activist or something like that. And I'm not interested in promoting activism per se. Yes, I'd like people to, be aware of their own political situation. But I'm not saying that everybody has to demonstrate all the time. We need to do other things in life, right? So some people can specialize as activists, but I'm not saying that. I'm talking about understanding, what are the constituents that really affect your capacity to live a good life, and then you have to do something about it. You can't just think about it. So that's what, and I'm saying that's primary. That if we're going to have a democracy of any kind, that has to be front and center. That if we don't have that, if, as Rousseau said, people don't pay attention to collective life, democracy is not. This is just something that people have said in op-ed pieces and editorials, especially in the run-up to the 2018 elections. But I think that that's true. The other thing is that voting's not enough.
Reminds me of one of the points that I said a lot in the video, I didn't read it, but they said that, and they're not the first to make this point, that the absence of superdelegates in the Republican Party, or a very small number, actually is what allowed Trump to take the nomination.
Yes.
So maybe too much democracy is actually not always so good.
Whatever.
There was a point, right, at which they just simply had no institutional means to stop him, right? There were a couple speeches made by Romney and some others, but
Yeah.
Just to give some context.
Yeah, I'm speechless. You know, I mean, it was super delegates in the Democratic Party that prevented Bernie Sanders from getting
This
the
is also true.
Is it all right if I raise a
Sure.
question? You know, so hi, this is great. It's so provocative. You know, as you go on, there's more and more issues that come up. So I'm not sure where to start. So I'll start at the end.
So many mistakes, right? How can you?
Well, that's one way of characterizing. That's not how I'm choosing to characterize it.
Okay.
But no, it's great. I read the manuscript, as you know, in draft form. And so let's take this last issue first. So if universalism has a Western Eurocentric bias, conceivably, like human rights and so on, what about democracy? Are you saying democracy is essential for a good life? And if so, is that also vulnerable to being seen as some kind of Western Eurocentric biased good that might not be applicable in all interests? Can we live a good life within a polity that's not democratic?
Sure. But I think that there is a tradition of democracy in the West that's important, useful, and not alien, not inherently alien to other cultures. That also, you know, ancient Athens was not Western. Ancient Athens was between East and West. It wasn't Western. So it got appropriated by the Christian West. It wasn't. So, and I think there has. I guess if I look at, I'm bumbling here. I think there are many ways of living a good life. I think it depends on your situation and what's available to you. And I don't want to be too heavy-handed with this, but one of the things that I've discovered, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but you know, I became sensitive to the critique of the Western canon, you know, in the 80s, I guess. And FYI, I was raised, well, apart from the suburbs of Chicago and Los Angeles, I was raised in a tradition which saw the Western canon as critical, not designed to reify, you know, the status quo, but actually critical of the status quo, and that's sort of the tradition that I'm more bringing here. But you know, but so if you look at different, and so then I've tried to expand my range of knowledge of other cultures and other ways of looking at things politically. I just haven't found, you know, a lot of texts that really. I mean, there certainly are texts. I mean, Confucianism is important. Gandhi is important. You know, there are but a lot of these societies really didn't have much in the way of popular movements. And in general, I think that they are not as well off as they could be because they didn't have that tradition. Now, I wouldn't want to force it down anyone's throats, but you know, and there's a lot that we obviously can learn from them. And there are lots of different ways, you know, 1,000 flowers bloom and all this, but I wouldn't want, I do see democracy as something that is not so much it's partly an idea, but it's partly something that has to be enacted. And in that respect, and here is the real weakness of this project, namely that I mentioned, the auto critique here. I mean, I assume that there is such a thing as a demos, that it's not just a fiction, it's not just and that it does tend to do the right thing. But that's an assumption. You know, and yeah, and if you get, if the demos is turned into a crowd by demagogues, charlatans, tyrants, and it's still called a democracy, that can be a real problem. And if, you know, there is a culture which says, we don't need everybody to participate. That might be okay, but my knowledge of other cultures is that when that's the case, that's generally at the expense of women and workers. That this kind of, ethic of non-participation ends up being correlated with the domination of women in the household and in society, and also a very hierarchical economic order. So, and I guess that here's the point about dignity you mentioned. For me, I think, everybody has something to offer, and I guess democracy offers the best direction for making that possible. But, it's not, Russia certainly doesn't have a tradition of democracy. China doesn't, although it tried to right for a while before. So I wouldn't want to push it down. We in the United States, President Reagan started this democracy promotion project in the 1980s. And it was also partly funded by the AFL-CIO. But it was really a way to export American institutions and American hegemony and economic might. And the idea of exporting democracy is contradictory. It's an oxymoron, because you're supposed to have the people exercising power, not having some idea of it being the primary motivation for it. So I just think it's an ongoing project. If for example, Rousseau, when he started talking practically about how his ideas could exist, he made some pretty serious compromises. He talked about Poland, Corsica, these places. His ideas for how they should be reformed weren't terribly democratic. And yet he also could be seen as the providing the Bible for the French Revolution, which was a democratic revolution, even if it got derailed. Anyway, not sure if that's an adequate answer to your question.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So I just wanted to return to the idea that you were talking about the demos, and you said in ancient Greece there was discussion, but then now after modernity it's been more about representation, and that's not quote unquote real democracy. But then when you were talking about human rights, you said that the idea of expanding that democracy works better in the nation state, or that the ideas that we are comfortable on acting on are within the nation state, or did I misunderstand you? Because that seems like, the nation state a natural
No,
realm
there's
for
a
democracy?
tension, there's a real tension
Okay.
between democracy and the nation state. But what I was saying is that if you're interested in democracy, you have to think about what promotes the collective power exercised by people. And that activity involves people understanding how they relate to each other and how they can act together. And it's just very difficult to formulate that in transnational terms, even if the concerns that we have are rooted in transnational practices. For example, the United States economy is challenged by China, to some extent. Most of what I buy, I don't look to make sure that it's made in China, but it's almost unavoidable. And it's possible, I think it's arguable, that there has been inequality in the conditions for exports and imports between China and the United States. They block a lot of our goods. We don't block theirs as much. What happened, so that's a real problem. But it turns out, rather than addressing that directly, we have a president who's addressed it in terms of questions of tariffs, which are arbitrary, more or less, and made it an issue of nationalism. Now, the fact that he has succeeded as a nationalist has a lot to do, as Sandy has taught us, with the racist element of his political discourse and his appeal to people's ignorance. But I do think that the fact that he has been successful in this regard is partly because dear Secretary Clinton, right, was completely unwilling to place any regulations on American capital or anybody else's capital, right? And so the idea of the nation was completely absent from her discourse, and that was a problem, I think. So I don't mean to say that the nation is wonderful or the state is wonderful. I'm just saying that if you think about what politics requires to make it coherent, it means that people have to reach beyond their own niche in society and find common ground with each other. And the material for that, so to speak, tends to be grounded in states, even if states co-opt them regularly in anti-democratic ways. But that we have to pay attention to who becomes president, who controls the House. It's serious. So does that help?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, bunch of things, but I'll pick up the thing you said. Trying to understand this, what you mean by plea or politicize or understanding ethical questions.
Okay.
And so I'll put it in a blunt way, this sort of blunt, stupid
Sure.
way. So how is that different from a plea to politicize or understanding of political questions?
Oh, well.
Because part of what you're saying sounds like that, like we need to see that political questions are, these are political questions and these are urgent questions and this is what, we need to be doing politics and see that there's a lot at stake
Okay.
in
Well,
doing politics, getting democracy right.
Okay, well, first of all, I'll answer it in two ways. First of all, there's sort of two meanings of politicizing that I'm aware of. And one is in what I might call a bad sense. That is to say, you don't want to look at the question on its merits, you just want to look at it in terms of the interests that are behind it and individuals' ambitions, and that's politicizing something, right? And so this is the kind of thing that the Supreme Court nominally wants to avoid, right? Chief Justice Roberts says, there are no Obama judges, there are no Bush judges, there are just judges, and we don't do